Annual AI Expo. My name is Jenny Rojanasatian, and I am just thrilled to be with you this afternoon. I represent NCW Tech Alliance. We're a 501c3 passionate about connecting people and technology resources together to ensure our rural communities are not left behind as technology accelerates. So excited to be co-hosting with Tammy McBride from North Central ESD, and I'll pass it over to her.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Good afternoon. My name is Tammy McBride. I want to welcome all of you to the second annual AI Expo during the North Central ESD STEM Summit. We are so excited for the lineup this afternoon, but first we want to go over just a little bit of housekeeping, and then we can get started. So the STEM Summit is a 4-day professional learning opportunity designed for K through 12 educators. And if you are an educator participating in the STEM Summit, don't miss out on all of the professional development opportunities throughout today and tomorrow virtually. Here's the schedule for today, just so you know what's coming up next. So that you can find back in the lobby through our Zoom. And the ESD, I just wanted to let you know, provides a wide array of programs and services and support to 29 school districts in our region, including the work I do. I have the opportunity to help connect students with businesses, with our career connected learning team. So thank you all for joining us again. I also want to thank our presenting sponsor, Microsoft. We are able to bring hundreds of educators and business community together to discuss the impacts of the AI in both education and business environments. So thank you so much, Microsoft. I also want to thank all of our sponsors for the STEM Summit. This is a huge lift for our sponsors. They are really actually partners in this event for the STEM Summit, and help us throughout the entire year with a ton of different things that we as the ESD does to support our schools. So thank you all to this partners listed here on the screen. And then also want to give out a huge shout out to the ESD team and several people who have helped put this together, and want to thank them all for their hard work to make this all happen. So thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. We have such a great program planned for you all. We have a featured presentation by author and speaker Rachel Mann, and then we have 5 incredible panelists. Tammy's going to kind of quickly go through those slides because they're going to introduce themselves, including Jerry from Data IQ, Greg from Checkpoint Software. Tammy, you'll want to hit those next one, wrapping us through. Yep. Anna, who's with WSU and Ag AID, Sai with Wenatchee Valley College, and Alan with Oregon State University. Some incredible expertise in the room today. Again, our moderator is going to help introduce all of them. So quick orientation to the agenda, which is the last slide from ours. We've got our featured speaker in just a few minutes. Then we're going to dive into a panel discussion. Now, if you had some burning questions for our featured speaker, she's going to come back after the break along with the panelists for Q&A. So we've got about 2.5 hours of content. We wanted to build in a break so you have some time away from the screen during it. So about 2:05, we're going to go to a break, but you're going to want to just keep your screens up. We're going to play some fun music from Jukebox AI in the background, and then join us again at 2:15 for Q&A. So know that there will be space for those questions. We're going to have our concluding remarks around 3:20, 3:30. And then for those of you who are having so much fun going in depth with these panelists, we've created some open time at the very end for more casual conversation. So formal program will end at around 3:30. The live feature and the recording is going to go off, and we're going to talk offline. So if you've got some deep questions, burning questions, it's a great time to have some one-on-one time with these incredible speakers. So back to you, Tammy.
Okay, so Jenny and I have asked two incredible champions of education to moderate today's event. I have the pleasure of introducing them. Stefan Troutman is the Education Technology Specialist here at the NCESD, and Doug Merrill is an all-star CTE educator at Wenatchee High School. Thank you, Stefan and Doug, for your leadership. I am just going to pass the torch off to you guys. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks, Tammy. Okay, so here's the deal, because nothing ever goes smoothly online, right? Like I see Doug is actively connecting as we speak, and I'm not sure if that's because he heard you introduce him or it's just great timing. So I think it's going to be great just to kick it to him. There he is. He's connecting to audio. He can't quite hear me. Thank you for kicking that over to us. Yeah, I'm Stefan Troutman. I am the ed tech specialist here at the ESD. I work closely with Tammy. Wow, I try to keep up with Tammy is kind of how that works out. And the fact that she used the word champion, it's going in my bio, it's going in my signature in my email, it's going in there, and I'll quote you as such. So yeah, I'm going into my second year at the ESD, and I'm excited to be here and kind of kick things around and run through some stuff and learn about some AI and let the experts do the talk in there and learn with everybody else. So Doug, can you hear me? Are you with us, buddy?
Hey, I'm outside. I'm on the outside, but they let me in.
All right. Well, we're happy to have you here.
We'll keep working on whether it's gonna my technical parts, but we'll get something figured out here.
There you go. All right. Well, how about you introduce yourself and then we'll kick into the poll.
Okay, sure. My name is Doug Merrill. I'm a teacher at Wenatchee High School. And so I love being on this team with the ESD and the things that they are promoting and doing in STEM. And so, yeah, let's jump right into the poll.
That's great. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that for us. And I don't know how this works in webinars. I'm assuming the rest of our panelists can see that. So I don't think they'll be able to answer it. It's just a couple of questions for our audience around just where you stand with artificial intelligence. So if you showed up to the AI Expo, but you don't know what AI stands for, you can tell us that right now. There you go. So let us know. And I might have just accidentally given away. That's my fault. So, oh, Doug, someone said hello to you in the chat. So make sure that you acknowledge Meg, because she seems like a nice person. All right, we've got some responses coming through here. Hey, Doug, I'm going to throw these to you. Do you know what AI stands for?
Artificial intelligence.
Well, now that's going to skew our results here, Doug. Okay, I'm just kidding. All right. Do you feel like you can describe what AI is or its applications to a student or colleague?
I don't. I mean, I can, yes, I can do the end results of what AI is, but what you actually, how would you teach AI or learn AI? No, I don't. I just know that I really like it when my credit union calls me up and says, hey, there's some funny stuff going on with your credit card. I know there's AI stuff going on there.
There we go. All right. And I keep making jokes about Westworld and HBO, but nobody finds those funny. So we'll just brush past that one. And then we're getting some samples of where people work. We will display the results of these polls here in a little bit. We've got about half the people who have completed it. So we'll give you a little bit more time. And then, oh, this is a good one. Doug, when you hear the word AI, what's your first reaction?
Movies that talk about the future and robots taking over.
I love it. Okay, very good. And then I'm also looking at our time, and Tammy's probably biting her nails going, Stefan just keeps talking. We need to be moving on. So last one, do you know what machine learning is?
You want my definition of machine learning?
Well, yes or no? Do you know what machine learning is?
I'm going to say a little bit.
All right, there we go. Well, I'm willing to bet we've got some experts in the virtual room here who can hook us up with that. But before we get rolling with that, I believe we have a featured speaker with Rachel Mann. Would you mind doing the honors and introducing her for us?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I want to introduce Rachel Mann. And why bring her into the conversation? Who is she? Well, she's currently number 17 on the Global Guru's top 30 education professionals. And here's something. They describe her as someone who speaks and writes about disruptive technology, education, and careers. and she's often described as an edu-futurist. And so I loved how they said that. So, well, what I know about her, Rachel's originally from West Virginia, and I believe a coal miner's daughter. And she now resides and has been in Arizona for quite some time. And she's been a regular keynote presenter in my world of career and technical education all around the country. And so that's how I got connected with her a couple of years ago. She taught in the classroom for 14 years, so she knows what that's all about. In the state of Arizona, in their education department, she's had multiple leadership roles. And she's just a top who's who in our world of the Association of Career and Technical Education. That is like, for older people, it's like that's the old vocational classes, or the business and technology and so on. But now she's on her own. She's doing her own thing. And this year, Rachel has been on a busy national speaking tour. I know last week she was in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and then she zipped across the country to Anaheim, and she was helping out teachers and students get ready for the school year. She's also the Director of Management Engagement for NCLA CTE. And so that's where she's able to she does weekly podcasts with people who are doing cutting edge things in technology, education, a lot of work for administrative types. So you can connect with Rachel, and she'll probably have a slide later, maybe at Rachel, and it's RACHAEL.edu. And so she's all out there, and she's a regular poster and all those kinds of things. So Rachel's super excited about AI and has used it firsthand. She uses it, and she's used it in graphic arts and written materials, helping to demonstrate AI where she goes and how she needs to help others understand it. So she is incredibly engaging in the way she goes around the country. She's seen it in classrooms. And so she's fully aware of how it can be used and how young students can be using it, and older adults. And so anyway, super happy to have Rachel with us.
Well, Doug, thank you so much for that introduction. And Doug mentioned that I do keynotes across the country, and I have to point out that in almost every keynote that I do, something that Doug is doing in the classroom is featured. He's doing phenomenal things, and his students, well, the society in general is so fortunate to have him in the classroom, and just a very innovative thinker. So thank you, Doug, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And today I'm just going to spend a little bit of time framing the conversation for the AI Expo and giving some basics, because I know we're at different levels. Some people are experts, as our panelists are, and then others are just tuning in to find out more about what AI is. And it's really something that we're using daily, sometimes without even realizing it. This is a report that was released by Singularity University, and it lists artificial intelligence as the #1 driving force that's going to change our future. So it's the technology that we really need to watch, because it's changing everything already. And to give you, and again, I said I was going to frame the conversation. So let's start off about thinking about what AI is. And AI has actually been around for a really long time, close to 75 years. It started with Alan Turing theorizing about abstract computing machines. And then they started realizing, what it was capable of. But, prior to 1949, computers could execute commands, but they couldn't remember what they did, and they weren't able to store the commands. So think about Dory, the Regal Tang with a short-term memory loss. That's computer execution. So this type of AI has no memory power, and it doesn't have the ability to learn from past actions. At some point, I'm hoping to come up with a whole analogy using Finding Nemo. But for now, we just have that piece of it and a graph from Levity to distinguish between types of AI. So you see the subsets of machine learning and deep learning, and there's other aspects of artificial intelligence as well. But from my understanding, this expo is going to focus more on those pieces. So this gives a brief overview, and when it comes down to it, AI simulates human intelligence, and it's something where we don't have AI with emotions, or it hasn't reached the same levels as us, so to speak, at this time. Now, machine learning is a subset that uses human computations to learn without being explicit. So as you see in this graph, you're seeing some human interactions, and it needs the human touch points for the deep learning systems, and it has some hand-coded features. So when you're using things such as speech and image recognition, speech to text, or even features within your Google Maps that are letting you know there's an accident up ahead, or maybe you're getting suggestions on you should tag your mother on social media in a picture. Those are examples of machine learning. And then we move into deep learning, which is much less human involvement. And sometimes we hear it used interchangeably with machine learning, but they are different concepts. And it requires higher levels of processing, but it mimics the brain's behavior. So the way that we think, that's what's happening with deep learning. So it's able to analyze data, it's able to make intellectual predictions. And some examples of deep learning, one of my favorites is the Tony neural network. And there's a video clip, I'll share with you a collection of resources, and you'll be able to watch a video if you haven't seen what he's doing with his Tony neural net. But basically, someone asked him at some point how he gets everything done. And he talked about, wanting a clone, but with machine learning and neural nets, he's able to create this app. And it's through a company called Rival Theory, but it's kind of creating this digitized self. So it looks through or reads, so to speak, all of his books, listens to his conversations with coaching, it listens to he doesn't just do keynotes, he does, days of live presentations and interactions. So it's growing as it's learning more about Tony. And this app will look like him, make the same facial expressions, sound like him, speak in multiple languages, but someone will be able to go into this app and it will answer questions in the same way that Tony would answer the questions. So think about the implications for both in education and in the workplace. If instead of having this bot that answers and responds to things, if you actually have an app that is able to do so much more. Another example of the deep learning would be Waymo or any of the autonomous cars that are learning the streets. You see them mapping out the streets. And I know in my community, people were becoming a little bit paranoid in our community chat, wondering, is Waymo actually spying on them? What is it taking over the world? All of these conversations where people were fearing that these cars were driving down their streets every 10 minutes. But, it has to be able to learn, that deep learning piece, and be able to tell the difference between a cat running across in front of the car or a human being versus a shadow or a change in lighting. So, right now humans are in the car, and eventually that won't be the case. We'll be just like elevators used to have attendants to make people feel more comfortable riding elevators. It'll be the same thing with Waymos and cars that are autonomous. Another example, and this is one of my favorite AI tools, it was called Jarvis, and now it's Jasper because there were some copyright issues that they had. But this is a tool to be able to write. And I started using Jasper back in December. I had COVID and I had brain fog, and I was just having a hard time having clear thoughts. And so I decided to download Jasper and use it because I had an article that was due for Techniques magazine, and it was on disruptive technology in education. So I thought, oh, I'll use AI to write an article about AI. And then I thought, what are the implications for plagiarism? And so I asked AI whether or not it's plagiarism, and AI seemed to think that it's not, but I'm sure that in the education world, we'll see some people really worrying about that in the future. Let's see, am I at my 10-minute mark? I think I may have a couple more minutes, but just really thinking about not only what is AI, but what are the implications for the future, both in the workplace and within education. And this is just one example of what could be an ethical dilemma moving forward. I'm so excited to hear from our panelists and all of the great things that they're going to share about artificial intelligence. And Doug mentioned that I would share my contact information. So first, here is a link to Wakelet. It's a free resource where you can curate information, and I have collections for all of my presentations, but for this one specifically, artificial intelligence, we have a 10-minute presentation, but you can spend hours digging through these resources, and I geek out about this stuff. So it's a lot of fun just learning what it's capable of. And then my contact information is here. Would love to connect with you on social media, or you can shoot me an email through my website. But again, thanks so much, and I look forward to answering some potential questions during the break later on, but also hearing from our panelists. And I'll turn it back over to someone else. So thank you.
Us. It's us. We're killing it. And when in doubt, just kick it to us. We got you. We'll hook you up. All right. So thank you, Rachel. That was crazy. And I'm compiling questions over here at some point. And one of mine is just to be compiling things that blew your mind. What's blowing your mind? I've got a couple already, so thanks. I appreciate that. And I think Tammy is in charge of sharing the slides. So Tammy, if you could do me a favor and pop those slides back up there on the screen, because I'd like to put all of our panelists up there for people to see, because we're going to move into a panel discussion where we are going to ask some questions, kick some questions to our panelists and let the experts do the talking. And we're seeing kind of a split screen there, Tammy. That's fun. And so we're going to ask our panelists to just introduce themselves. And then while they are doing that, I am going to share the results of the poll with you. That way, our panelists can also see that. Am I active? Did someone else start sharing them? This is fun. Multiple people kind of trying to figure this out. So, okay, I think you are seeing the results of our poll here. Someone give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down on whether or not you're actually seeing the results of the poll. Most people knew what. I'm just talking until someone.
They are seeing the polls.
Okay,
Definitely.
gotcha.
Jump in and indicate that.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, so you can see the results of the poll there, and if our panelists are taking a look at that, you can kind of get a feel for where our audience is at, just in terms of a lot of excited people and just base knowledge of artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, which I now know the difference of. Thank you, Rachel. Okay, so we are going to jump into our panel. So if we could have our panelists turn on their cameras, that way we can kind of all see you. We'll just have that as a free-flowing discussion. And we're going to start, you saw his picture up there, but we're going to start with Jerry, and you're actually going to have to tell me the proper pronunciation of your company name, because I'm kicking that.
Data IQ.
See? I should have just gone for it. Should have just had a little more confidence. Okay, so if we could start just by Jerry introducing yourself, who you are, what you do, where you work, and then we'll go around with all of our panelists and start off with our first question.
Yeah, of course. Hey everyone, Jerry Hartanto. I'm an AI strategist at Data IQ. Data IQ is a development platform for AI machine learning. We have this concept of everyday AI, which means that we think everyone in their working environment should be able to do AI. So very much believe that it's accessible for everyone. So happy to be here to talk about that. And as an AI strategist, I help organizations to think through the possibilities of AI, how to apply it, what kind of business outcomes they can get out of it, how to scale it, capabilities that are required, kind of those kind of things, in order to be able to get really good benefits out of AI. So great to be here. Looking forward to chatting with you all.
All right, then we'll kick over to Greg.
All right, hopefully I passed the mute button test, Stephanie. Awesome. Hey, everyone, I'm Greg Pepper, and I'm a security architect with Checkpoint. I've been here a little over 15 years right now, and I have the opportunity and pleasure of working with both our customers, our products organization, of which there are thousands of software developers, creating technologies across network, endpoint, cloud, mobile security technologies. As you can imagine, we're more dependent upon these things every single day, right? And both whether we're educators, whether we're professionals, technology permeates every element of our lives. And the ability to secure those resources, and whether it's securing the technology in the classroom, at the district's perimeter, online with all the cloud applications that we're using, like Zoom today as an example, right? Security permeates every type of organization across our society. And our products and our technologies, which are highly dynamic in nature, use both a variety of artificial intelligence, machine learning, some of the jargon that we'll talk about today. But really, how do we make these technologies more effective and easier to use, right? And not make them barriers to implement, or maybe not to deploy in the correct way, where they're actually no longer then effective and beneficial for the purposes they serve. But thank you very much for the opportunity to join the panel, and looking forward to the conversations today.
And well done on the mute button test. I was leading a session about an hour and a half ago, and I talked on mute for 2 minutes and nobody told me. It was embarrassing. All right, and I think Trevor here, he told me that you go by Anand. Is that how you pronounce it?
Oh yeah, so Anand.
Anand. Okay, gotcha. All right.
Yeah. So nice seeing you all, and hope we'll have an exciting afternoon here. It'll be in fact even more fun if one of the panelists happens to be a machine and we are trying to figure out which one is it. Yeah, so I am faculty in computer science at Washington State University on the eastern part of the state. And I'm a computer scientist by training. In fact, I don't consider myself a core AI researcher. I started out as a high performance computing. I'm going to throw out a few jargons here, sorry, bear with me, but high performance computing and computational biology. That's what my roots are in, and I happened to start working on data problems. A lot of problems from the application domain, especially life sciences, happen to have a lot of data. And even though whenever there is a data, there's also an immense opportunity to learn from the data, possibly extract some knowledge that you can act on. And then I started working with some agricultural folks, and I saw a whole bunch of applications where AI could be used. And so that's the angle I'm coming into this panel, mostly from what we typically call a use-inspired AI type of approach. So I'm eager to hear what all of the panelists have to say and to learn from all of you. Thank you.
I did tell Tammy and Jenny that if we really want to do this right, we'd have an AI moderating the discussion. I'm just saying. So maybe next year, one of you, something passes the Turing test, and that'd be a fun game. I love it. All right. We're going to kick it over to, is it Sai?
Yes. Thank you, Stefan. My name is Sai Ramaswamy, and I'm a program coordinator and faculty in the engineering technology program at Wenatchee Valley College. Full disclosure, I am not a machine as yet, although I would have actually preferred if there was some machine taking my spot here, because most of the time I usually get pretty nervous, and maybe the machine probably does a better job here. But for now, you just have to bear with me. So Wenatchee Valley College is actually a community college here in central Washington. We have been, as you can see in the banner behind me, educating folks since 1939, or should I say building human intelligence since 1939, hoping that some of this human intelligence that we are developing can go forward and develop more smarter machines that can do artificial intelligence. In my role as faculty, I teach courses related to industrial automation, such as mechatronics, programming logic controllers, and we use a lot of, we apply some of the areas of for industrial automation. We actually deal with applying artificial intelligence, some of the concepts that these experts are developing here, and I am eagerly looking forward for this discussion, and like Anand, also hoping to learn from this discussion. Thank you.
And that brings us around to Alan.
Hi, everybody. Alan Fern from Oregon State University. I have been called a robot in teaching evaluations, so I have no proof that I'm not. I don't feel like one, but yeah, who knows? I became interested in AI at a pretty early age. I guess I'm one of the lucky students that sort of knew what they want to do. So watching Star Trek, The Next Generation, data always fascinated me. And I got into AI at that point, started in the early 90s in high school, wrote some neural network code that barely worked, but kept on working at it, did electrical engineering, then computer engineering, and now I teach computer science. at Oregon State. I've been there 18 years. Do a lot of research in AI. That's my main field. Machine learning and automated planning. Those are two buzzwords. One you've learned about already. Those are my two main areas, and I like working with robots. So legged robots, bipedal robots. That's one of my new fun projects, and I'm also working with Anand on AI for agriculture. So we'll leave it at that.
Well, okay, well, I think Doug is going to ask our first question to the panelists. Before he jumps in, I just want to speak to the audience real quick. We've got a series of prepped questions for our panelists that we're going to kind of have them kick around a little bit. But if you have questions for them after we come back from our break, there is going to be a Q&A where we'll harvest questions from the audience. You can submit those in a couple of ways. If you want to drop them into the chat, we'll grab them and compile them there. Or there is a Q&A option in Zoom webinars. And so if you click on that Q&A, you should be able to ask questions within there. We'll just be closely monitoring both of those. If you are engaging in the chat, make sure over there under that little drop-down menu, it says to, and there's a couple of different options. You'll probably see hosts and panelists and everyone. So you might be talking like us directly and nobody else can see it, or everyone. You're gonna wanna drop that where it says everyone, so everyone can see your question. All right, Doug, I'm finally done talking. You're up.
All right. Well, we're going to start out with the softball questions, just throwing some things out there so that because of the diversity of knowledge in our group, this is question number one. And if you feel like, hey, I don't have a lot to add to this, then we're going to start with you the next time. I am going to start this one out. I'm just going to throw it out to Greg first. And then if a couple of you want to come in, then that's kind of how we'll do it. We'll have one person start up. And then if a couple of people want to pile on to that, and how it might be unique to what you're doing or something you want to add to it, then just feel free to do that. But we don't have to have all five people answer all five, all the time through our questions. And so I'm going to jump into this question. It says, how is AI improving our lives? Greg?
Well, I like to say in some ways it's putting some time back in our lives, and that it's helping us to more effectively do certain tasks that in the past took a lot of man hours to analyze data, have reactions, run through playbooks, build various security controls to proactively implement or detect in real time. And I think that's one of the big paradigm shifts in at least my industry, is that, in the early 90s and 2000s, a lot of the security controls were more static in nature. Here's my firewall, here's some rules, implement those rules. Here's some antivirus, here's some signatures. And though they were updatable, they were fairly static in their nature, right? They're looking for particular elements of malware to then detect and block. But we all know that none of those technologies alone are adequate to keep up with today's threats and be as highly agile as we need them to be and as effective. And, there was discussion in the introduction about how Wells Fargo and they all detect malicious activity. I just had that recently because my son's Nintendo account apparently got hacked and they charged $1,000 on my Wells Fargo credit card. But the point being is whether we're implementing it on hundreds of thousands of endpoints, network security controls, cloud controls, they all need to be highly dynamic. And one of the key things about them, I think Alan talked about this, and not to punt to you, but you talked about data, right? And how the analysis of data is one of these things that artificial intelligence and machine learning do significantly better, faster than we are able to as humans, and process significantly more information to accelerate both the learning, right? That machine learning element of it, but also to think like a human, right? What should that reaction potentially be based on that situation, and whether I'm analyzing agriculture or building self-driving cars, or in our case, implementing security technology to, hey, should you be allowed to open that email or should you not be allowed to open that email, as an example, might be an implementation of said technologies.
Alan, go ahead. And then Ananth, why don't you follow up, because you talked about lots of data coming into your program. So go ahead, Alan.
Yeah, very, very quickly, voice recognition. I mean, you all remember when talking to a computer on the phone was impossible. Now it's kind of okay sometimes. That's all AI powering voice recognition. That's a big deal. Translation, another thing. That's you can actually use translation systems pretty well now. So that's a big deal. Recommendations, so search engines, big deal. Like those are powered by AI. That's why they're so effective now. There's a lot of issues with recommendation engines as well, but I think there's a huge amount of good. So I'll leave it at that. 3 things.
And maybe from the scientific discovery standpoint, I think there's terrific value for AI. If you include even things like Jeopardy and Go, AI got good at actually, playing games. But then many of those developments that happened for those problems also transitioned into some real exciting scientific discoveries, like, for example, protein folding. Like there's an AlphaFold, which is from DeepMind, and it does an amazing job of basically trying to decode protein structures, and this took actually decades of work from the human side, right? We're trying to essentially get good at it and trying to predict the structure of a protein molecule. Nature knows how to do it in a matter of a few milliseconds, whereas humans were writing code, which the simulation code would run for millions of CPU hours and still generate a lot of errors. And then the AI methods are trying to bridge the gap between the two sides, right? I mean, it's gotten really accurate and precise, and it needs a lot of data, train, label, and so on. So I just wanted to point that out as like not just on the technology side, but also on the science side and the basic science. I think AI has some really cool role.
And Doug, if I could just add in real quick too, a lot of our customers tend to be on the business side. So when you think about how AI or machine learning can help there, we kind of mentioned data and being able to make sense out of that data, i.e. being able to recognize patterns. Those patterns then lead to some form of prediction. So with some level of confidence, the machine's able to kind of think through what could happen. And those predictions can really help power a lot of businesses determine what next steps are. So as an example, if a business has got a lot of customers and they're trying to figure out which customers might churn, meaning they might just leave the company or go to another competitor of the company, you could run machine learning algorithms against those set of customers and say, oh, these are the likely customers that would probably move away from the company. And then you could even say, well, what could I do to make them stay? So you could run through, the machine learning could run through a bunch of offerings to say which offerings are most likely to be able to be accepted by certain customers. And even how do you deliver that through a telephone call, through an account executive, through an email, whatever, and what's the best way to open the emails, and on and on and on. So all of these predictions can lead to, I guess, better recommendations for what a company can do.
Okay, thank you. Stephanie, you gonna hit this next one?
Sure, you got it. I'm looking at our list of questions, and we clearly don't have time to get through all of them. And so I'm just thinking, Jerry, about what you said, running those AI algorithms for decision making, and it makes me wonder about like industry best practices. Like, what are the industry best practices around artificial intelligence, and then what, if any, like inspired them to be created? Right, with every rule, there's a story. So, can you think of any examples off the top of your head?
Yeah, I mean, so from we look at it from more of a business point of view, because that's kind of where the majority of our customers are. I think a couple of industry best practices. One, we want to start with the business problem. Quite often, we think about technology as being pretty cool, and we develop a lot of neat things around that. But unfortunately, sometimes they don't actually solve the business problem, which means then the company doesn't get value out of it. And then, of course, they say, well, this thing's not what we wanted to do, so they abandon that effort. That's something we definitely don't want to happen. Another kind of best practice might be around, along the lines of this, is multidisciplinary collaboration. So if you think about kind of the way that AI is developed, you have very technical people like data scientists and data engineers, And then you have people who are very knowledgeable in a specific domain, whether that be in a industry or in a business. And you want collaboration between the two of them to be able to help each other understand the data and the meaning of the data, because data is so key for a machine learning or an AI algorithm to work. So that ability to kind of work across multiple functions is particularly important. So you want to, to collaborate, if you will. And then another kind of important thing, because we talk about data so much, I'd say is data lineage, or the understanding where that data comes from and how it was developed. Because the machines are honestly pretty dumb in the sense that they're only going to learn from the data. So if you feed them bad data, then they're going to come up with the wrong conclusions. So that's another kind of thing that I think many people forget. And oftentimes, if you're in a business and then the leaders say, okay, that's great that you came up with these recommendations. How did you get it? And the question then comes back to, well, the data came from here and this is what we did to it. If there's not believability in that, then again, the outcomes are called into question. And then the last thing that I would say is that AI and machine learning is a set of experiments. So in other words, nobody really knows what the outcome is going to be. And so there needs to be some patience in order to be able to apply the algorithms to the data, tweak the algorithms, if you will, and see which algorithms are going to end up working and which ones are going to be best to use in a live environment. So yeah, those are a few best practices that we've come across.
Yeah, no, Mr. E dropped it in the chat too. I wanted to highlight it because we see it as, one of these vendors that's out there trying to sell products, right? Generate revenue, right? We're a $2 billion company, right? We have thousands of sellers out there. You talk about data, Jerry, right? We have our pipeline data, right? Thousands of reps are feeding information to the company, telling us how much we believe these are going to happen. Now, sometimes it's good data, sometimes it's bad data, right? We have hundreds of thousands of support tickets a year, right? We have over 100,000 customers globally that are opening service requests with issues across the different, right? This creates the data set, right? And then you think about the 86 billion queries that happen a day feeding into our threat cloud when all these products and solutions are actually talking on the internet and trying to make the decision functions about legitimate versus malicious traffic, right? And understanding that the data is the key. And if you poison the data, to Jerry's point, right, you can poison the outcome potentially. But at the same token, and this is one thing that's big in our company, is this trust but verify, right? Is understanding that, yes, we have these algorithms and these great technologies, but we gradually implement and believe in them over time, tuning and optimizing their implementations. And whether it's our pipeline and forecast analysis to tell Wall Street how much we think our revenue is going to be in the next quarters ahead, or we think about how do our security products effectively prevent against the next vulnerabilities and attacks that are out there, right? These are the things that collectively our types of technologies have to understand. But think about it as educators, right? Think about the big data that is student records, student achievement. Not that grades are the end all be all, but there are macro and micro trends to potentially be detected to help impact student outcomes.
So I'll pile onto this. So as Jerry and Greg have talked about this, it's like, what are the things that you work with your students? What is it that you're making them aware of? Jerry brought up, okay, what about this? What about bad data? What about biased data? We haven't even gotten into that. How do you make it believable? And then how do you verify it? And so it's like, what's kind of a process that students are experiencing?
So I think it's an interesting question. So as my fellow panelists point out, one of the key things here is the data. Data is one aspect, very critical for the AI aspect, and the important thing to understand is, okay, data is one aspect of it, but there are also other things that you need to kind of find out whether, okay, is this data good data? Is this right data? Are there any issues with the data? So what I actually work with my students when we try to educate them on AI is that not to be completely, data is important, but not like, unless you have tested it properly or have tried it, not to 100% trust it, but at least have that ability where, you're trying to go through the data to find out, okay, is this right data, right? For example, right now we are working on a project with Alan and Anant in the Ag Aid, and where we have installed some sensors in an orchard. And we have collected a lot of data, but that's good. But the next step is to, okay, how do we make use of this data? First of all, understand, is this data even helpful for us? Is it going to be, can we make use of this data to ultimately make the kind of decisions we want to make, right? So what I tell my students is that, okay, data is great, but then there are also other aspects that you have to understand and appreciate. You have to have some other expertise to make proper use of this data, to understand and appreciate this data, to kind of identify the issues with data so that you can improve it and thereby, enable, take full benefits of AI.
Want me to ask the next one, Doug?
Sure.
Go ahead, man.
Well, I was thinking about the pandemic. I've heard about how things have compressed in timelines. Timelines have compressed and accelerated how much of work is done. Or, I mean, people have obviously sped up, or it's really been really difficult for them. So in your businesses, in your work, careers, how has the pandemic in the last few years affected what your work has been like? Alan, let's go back to you.
Interesting question. Well, I mean, I mean, at the beginning, at least for the first year or so, yeah, we were doing work over Zoom like this. So that was the biggest impact, of course. You stop going to the office. It became yeah, I mean, this doesn't really have anything to do with AI, but it became you had to learn how to sort of work with students again. So if you're used to working on a whiteboard, drawing, what's in your head, yeah, there's not really a great replacement for that. You can try, but yeah, I think communication was not as good because of that. Obviously, the robotics work, depending on what restrictions were in place, was a lot harder to do. I think mostly the obvious things. But I'd say the good thing is I do now have an appreciation for working at home more. You save a lot of time in some cases, and so I'm definitely going to try to be balancing working at home versus going in and getting the utility there, as opposed to just going in for the heck of it.
Anybody else? Yeah, go ahead, Sai.
So just to add to what Alan said, the pandemic, of course, also caused disruption even from the students' perspective, right? So earlier they used to come to attend lectures. They had a well laid out structure for them in terms of learning, and this pandemic kind of disrupted that. Now everything, lectures were all online. Sometimes some of them were synchronous, some of them were not synchronous. That is, they watched it at their whenever it was convenient to them. So in other words, it kind of again, going back to, if you want to connect this to AI, this what I would say is, pre-pandemic, it was more like machine learning, where there was a structure in terms of how the students were learning, and during the pandemic, it was more like deep learning, where the students probably, at least that's what my students were telling, that they were learning mostly on their own, from whatever, from watching videos or from other sources. So there was disruption, quite a lot of disruption, that even from the students had to go through.
Yeah, just tying it back to AI too. I think one of the things that people kind of learn from the pandemic is that, it's a shock. It was what they call a black swan event, which means that from a kind of machine learning point of view, something very hard to predict, and not many of those things happen, so very hard to learn from. So I don't know if this is true, but I've heard that people even kind of disconnected their machine learning algorithms in order to add kind of like the human element back into it, because humans could maybe process this thing a little bit better. But I think that is another area where there's probably quite a bit of research going on in right now, is kind of how to handle those black swan events from kind of an AI machine learning perspective.
I should probably add one more point in the sense that since this on AI and, when we talk of careers and pathways in computing, and especially, I believe across the different kinds of sectors, industry sectors, manufacturing and so on, perhaps computing was the most resilient in some sense to handle the effect of pandemic. And so it could basically serve as a motivation for several of our audience to pick up computing pathways, right, as career options. And at least, yeah, we are in academia, at least like Alan said, I was also trying to learn on the fly how to teach a class over Zoom and so on. But I think it compares nothing to what folks who were actually really working on wet labs and going to farms and going to industry to actually do hands-on work. And I think their level of impact was much more pronounced. And I think the impact on computing careers were relatively minimal, is how I see it.
No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, as someone who's worked remotely for 20 years in the IT industry, the biggest change is really, the amount of flights that I've been on the last few years. But I think the thing that is truly highlighted is, one, the need to be hyper collaborative in everything we do, both in the way we work with people, the way we work with projects, the way we're able to focus and do the work when it needs to get done, but potentially then have some balance in our lives. And you talked about adding some human elements to the machine learning algorithms to make it more ability to, I don't want to say have empathy, right? But that's a big part of who we are as people, right? And maybe one of the things that separates us from the machines and the ability to disconnect and unplug for a little bit of time. I mean, when I look at the 6,000 plus people that work here at Checkpoint, 2,000 of them, again, already were highly virtual, highly remote. Many of them were not, right? And we had to very quickly adapt to have thousands of software developers that are used to sitting at desks, writing code, checking code in a hyper controlled environment, that are now all working remotely. But again, that was a first world problem for a software security company, and is pale in comparison to the impact, to our frontline workers and others who are truly impacted, including our, professional educators out there.
All right, thank you.
Go ahead, Doug.
Oh, just saying thanks.
Oh, well, agreed. I should. All right, there. I'm looking at our time. We've got about 7 minutes, and there's definitely a question I want to get in before our break, which is about people who might be thinking about going into careers in AI. So I'd love to kind of go around and hit everybody if we could, just to get your top 3 skills or interests that someone might need to be successful in the AI profession. So again, that's top 3 skills or interests to like have a continuing career in the AI profession. And I'm gonna let you think about that for a second, but feel free to jump in whenever you're ready.
I'll jump in quickly. So I'd say, one thing I do like to emphasize sometimes is that having a strength in AI plus something else is like a superpower. They amplify each other. So I think it's easier to get a degree in biology and then learn AI, as opposed to learn AI and then learn enough biology to be effective. So I'd say that first. You gotta, work on your math, like be strong mathematically, of course. Statistics, which are not taught as much in high school as they probably should be. You want to be strong statistically, and programming, of course. You got to be a strong programmer. Those would be the things.
Yeah, that was actually going to be where I was going to go, and not that it's a specific programming language, but just the logic behind being a software developer. And we're all kind of software developers in a little bit of what we do. And it doesn't matter if it's Python or PowerShell, or, I'm old school. I wrote a lot of stuff in Perl back in the day. But being able to apply the software capabilities in highly programmatic and structured data ways, right? And it's no longer just a simple SQL query against a, Microsoft SQL database as an example, is some of the legacy ways in which we try to build these information systems, but truly understanding that software programming, just like English and just like mathematics, are a core competency. And I think in a lot of fields, it's going to be something that's going to be, I don't want to say expected, but it's kind of almost, a minimum entry point, that if you don't have these basic programming software capabilities, Well, go back to start, get that, just like you got, your math and your English and your science as an example. Well, did you take that CS 101, 102 to give you that foundation for whatever pathway you want to move forward into?
Yeah, I also wanted to double click on something Alan said, which is kind of that superpower of knowing something else. I think having a good understanding of the domain and also the drivers of that domain, like what makes that domain move forward, what holds it back in terms of obstacles, that kind of goes back to kind of understanding the drivers of what problems to solve. So if you think of business, maybe it's a value chain of a specific industry, and trying to understand that in terms of understanding what the problems are that you could then apply AI to. Another thing that I think would be helpful is understanding the different types of analytics. So we talked about AI and machine learning, which is kind of a predictive or prescriptive, if you will, but there's also kind of descriptive and diagnostic, and those are important too. Those are useful too in certain environments. And then also just kind of like, we talked about AI and machine learning being something that you don't have to program, but there are other times where, programming explicitly is also helpful, and just applying regular business rules is helpful. So understanding kind of that spectrum of analytics and where AI and machine learning kind of fits into that. And then the last thing I would say is, when we think through AI and machine learning in general, there's a workflow to it. In other words, it doesn't happen just automatically. There's okay, I got to go get the data. And then at the end, it pops out a machine learning model or a deep learning model. And in between, there's a whole bunch of stuff that needs to be done. And being able to understand that stuff and where you want to play in kind of that particular workflow is also kind of useful to understanding where you fit.
So I think everyone has touched upon all the points. I think I'm really on board for like the AI plus X or the CI plus CS plus X, right? So we've been talking about like computer science plus X type of programs for a while, and I think AI has the right ingredients in some sense to really partner with closely with the domain science, and I think having that domain knowledge really pushes the envelope on what we can achieve with AI, and not just AI for the sake of AI. I think that's a great point. Also, I want to add one more thing, which is in some sense, abstraction is important, like the power of a little bit of abstract thinking. As computing people, we tend to think of problems and then we try to abstract it out, saying we 5 different types of problems. They must have something common or shared, and then being able to abstract it at a common layer. So we solve the problem of that abstraction and then be able to customize it, right? So the abstraction, the ability to think in a somewhat abstract manner really goes at the core of being able to generalize, right? Or develop generalizable technology or techniques. And I think that's a useful thing somehow to start inculcating, right? In addition to quantitative skill sets and programming skill sets, to think about possible abstract way of thinking it, right?
I completely agree. Whatever my fellow panelists have said, good domain knowledge, preferably a cross-disciplinary domain knowledge, computing skills, mathematical ability. All those would serve you well for careers in AI. One other aspect I would like to add is also some, background in terms of philosophical or ethical aspect would also be very helpful. So especially sometimes you're in a dilemma where you have to know whether what you're doing is actually is this right or wrong, and or sometimes are you doing it just for the sake of doing it, or is this really helpful to solving a problem or creating others? So a little bit of those, what I would say, softer skills, not just the math and programming and all those aspects. There is also probably some amount of ethical, philosophical aspect is also important of this.
All right,
Okay.
coming up.
Yeah,
on
go
our
ahead,
break.
Doug.
Yeah, coming up on our break. And so Jenny, why don't you tell us how long we're going to take for that? And then Want to throw out a teaser? Hey, Tom, I liked your comments there. What are deep fakes and fake truths and how we're being duped. So that's kind of a teaser for the next hour, along with the big question, will robots take over the earth?
Well, thank you all for the discussion so far. It's so exciting to see so many people online joining us. I know it is a Thursday afternoon in August, and you're engaging in some AI learning with us. It's been so much fun so far. Tammy's going to pull up this AI jukebox we found online, which is like an open source. You can play some music. We're going to go for 10 minutes. And when we come back, we're going to be doing audience Q&A with all of our panelists and our featured speaker, Rachel. She's staying on for this part. So take a break, get another cup of coffee, water, enjoy some music stylings here. If you can put in the chat if you want us to search for a particular genre. Otherwise, Tammy and I will just start playing some music, and we will see you back at 2:15. Again, keep your, just go ahead and stay logged into the platform. Put us on mute if you need to. Take a break, and we'll see you right here at 2:15.
Have you never me human? We saw very same the batu, my like fire spin. There's open arm. Beneath the body. Destined is coming in. Yeah, I'm going Never you, but you are, and no rain. Have pictures, words to even my food. Every your Sunday go. Every dead in the punctual Sakimo Mago Sleeper I never knew what I don't need without you, or how much I need for me. Believe in me, though you know I see like before. 'Cause I don't have to lie anymore. Thus regained with humble start, from dust of lipids to cells and heart. With my hopes, with my such much time, the last will have our minds from dust decay. It's Christmas. I went back home. Christmas time, you know what that means. Oh, it's hot sunshine. It's Christmas time, and you know what that means. It's hot sunshine. Some people I don't say is a storm, but this is much better than much. So glad you're back home and meet me by the door. Oh, it's my turn. It's Christmas time. Some people like to go skiing in the snow, but this is much better than that. So never bubble by you. So grab it, I know it's Christmas time, and you know what time it is. It's not it's Christmas time, and you know what that means. It's hot time. It's Christmas time, and you know what that means. It's hot time. It's Christmas time, and you know what I mean. It's hot dog time.
All right, looks like it is 2:15. So Tammy, thank you for playing with something new online, a little jukebox AI sampler. Thank you to our technology advisors at the Tech Alliance, Trevor Coates. I know he's listening in today. They helped advise on how we put this together, and they send us fun recommendations like Jukebox AI. So that's one of the best parts of this job. I'm going to bring our moderators back on to help us with the Q&A. So now we've dedicated some time. We have our featured speaker, all of our panelists, and a lot of you listening in. So there's been some messages into the Q&A. I'm going to let Doug and Stefan take it from here to do some questions. Remember, there's that feature you can put a question into or into the chat. We'll try to get all of those answered.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's go to Tom. So Tom's got deepfakes are emerging extension of fake truths, bad data. How can the average user know when they're being duped? You want to take that one on?
I'll start. Greg may have some more to say about this since he's in the security area. I'd say just like anything, when you started getting duped by phone calls, you learn to be cautious. So be cautious. I mean, these are just going to get better and better. I think eventually we just have to rely on authentication mechanisms. It'll be a war, and you just have to be cautious and don't give out your credit card number without really being sure of who you're giving it to. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, look, the human is always the weakest link in any security paradigm. And when you think about people, let's be honest, people are gullible sometimes. But when we think about what the technology behind the scenes is doing, both it's doing it to us and it's doing it against us. You know, one of the things we like to talk about in our industry is how that cost of offense, however, is significantly less than the cost of defense, right? And the ability for the bad threat actors to potentially use things like artificial intelligence and machine learning, whether it's to generate these war driving algorithms to try and sell you some car warranties. Again, there's no car warranty out there. But the point being is that, you know, there's things which, you know, you have to trust but verify. Right. And whether it's an inbound call, whether it's an email, whether it's an SMS text that we get, right, we're so moving so fast. But when you think about opening that email, clicking on that link, giving out personally identifiable information, we have to pause. We have to take a step back. We have to verify and understand maybe this is not the right circumstance. This is out of the normal. We talked about identifications of data patterns with one of the core concepts of machine learning. Right, is how do we synthesize that information in real time and then make a human decision about the outcome?
Kind of to add on to that, just from an education perspective, do you have any advice for teachers in facilitating the offense for students, right? Like I know the tech department where I used to work used to always use picnic error, right? Problem in chair, not in keyboard, like hardy har guys, right? It's my fault. I get it, right? But like with students also, right? They're always kind of the weakest point. Do you have any advice for teachers trying to provide that training for their students?
So I think the question boils down to how do we teach common sense in a classroom? I don't know. We all grapple with it ourselves. What is the right sense to call it a common sense? I believe the best defense mechanism is really the common sense. At least at the undergraduate level, you know, I'm not talking of K through 12, but at least at the undergraduate level, when you talk about computer science programs these days, accreditation agencies like ABIT and so on, they are starting to enforce that you know, security and privacy preserving programs or curriculum should be part of the main curriculum, right? I mean, it's no longer an option course as it used to be a few years back. So pretty much all the accredited programs, if you're walking into a computer science program today, you are likely to take courses at least on security and privacy. And I do not have much of I don't work in this area, and I don't have much session at the K through 12 level.
I'll also mention, since you mentioned Common Sense, there's a website called Common Sense Media that has tons of great resources for educators. And then even Gaggle is another one that has both paid and free resources that are helpful for educators. And they post a ton of free content on social media as well.
So in addition to common sense, I guess critical thinking also maybe something that we can stress for the students, especially understanding, like Greg just mentioned, trust but verify, but how do you do that, right? So to have that critical thinking ability and trying to understand more on how this data, where this is coming from, those things also go a long way to minimize the error from the human side.
Yeah, one of the things that I heard a long time ago is talks about trends and analysis. And it was actually Newt Rockney, one of the football coaches, that talked about it, where anything can happen once, right? Once is an accident. Things can happen twice. That's a coincidence. Third time in a row something happens, now we have a trend, right? So not to say that we need 3 elements of data verification, but if TikTok, Snapchat, and Facebook are your 3 areas of verification of the data points, maybe you go back to start and think about where the information is coming from, right? The things that we maybe hear from our friends on the playground or just talking amongst colleagues is a little bit different than whether we get them from accredited sources of information, right? And understanding that the credibility and the trustworthiness of those providing the information, let alone whether it was generated through artificial intelligence and machine learning, right? But content creation, and whether we're journalists or educators, or, not to say that YouTube is the beginning or end of all, but right, how many times do we go to YouTube these days when we have a problem, we want to find out the answer? And are we verifying whether or not the people providing the information are actually, legitimate human individuals to be certified to provide that information? Or is it just, dare I say, you talked about some deep fake out there. There's a couple of food channels I watch. They must be some pretty good deep fakes because my recipes are coming along nicely here.
I really want to kick around Ray's question. And when I say kick around, I mean, I think it's kind of cool and I want to hear you talk about it. What human problems can be solved only be solved using AI? So I kind of fumbled to that one. What human problems can only be solved using AI?
The first thing that comes to my mind and my little thoughts is just like dangerous things that would put people in harm's way, those kinds of things.
Something completely opposite, which is not socially important, but games. So chess, Go, where AI is way beyond where any human mind will solve. So if you think of Go as a problem and solving it, chess is a problem and solving it optimally or close to optimally is what we're trying to do, then AI is way ahead. And that sort of shows you that as things get logistically more complex, getting better solutions are going to require superhuman intelligence, you could say. So yeah, that's something that I think is sometimes not appreciated. Like AI should be superhuman in many areas of decision making, just like a calculator is superhuman at adding large numbers.
Rachel, you look like you want to say something.
This is why I don't play poker, Doug. No, I was actually just reading through the questions. However, I will mention that that as far as I was watching a video recently, and I can't remember who it was, but it was someone asking a robot, asking an AI what distinguishes them from humans, and they said that one of the benefits of using AI is that AI doesn't allow emotions to get in the way, and things like confirmation bias. So there's that, but then we also have to think about how there's that potential, which has been mentioned throughout the panel, the potential for manipulation. When we get to a point where AI knows us better than we know ourselves, then we also have to watch out for that as well, that sense of being able to trust AI more than you trust your own decision-making skills.
I was just gonna say that, Rachel, you beat me to it because I was on mute. I did not pass the mute button test. But yeah, the similar kind of thing is, when you think about like, who would you offer credit to, or who would you think would be a good manager, or who do you think you should promote? So many of us have biases in terms of our own personal experience. AI could be no different in the sense that it's only going to learn from its experience. But if we assume that we're able to provide the type of data, if you will, that would allow AI to learn from what all of us have seen, as opposed to just what one of us has seen, then I think AI has the ability to potentially make some of those better decisions for us, taking away some of that bias.
Well, and to build on what was said earlier, right, the more complicated the problems, the more I think we're going to need to integrate these technology capabilities to help solve those problems, right? And whether it's some of the agriculture challenges that Anath and team are focusing on, you just think about BioPharma and some of the things that they've been able to tackle within the last few years, specific to COVID and otherwise, right? The use of, the data analytics and predictive machine learning capabilities to help test and synthesize and understand, whether it's drug trials. I mean, we use it extensively on our own malware analysis, right? Right. We take these bad files, we put them in this little sandbox, and this is all done by computers to learn about what's actually happening and determining, again, is this now going to infect the district's computers, or is this something that's just someone's resume coming in who's looking for career opportunities? So there's so many ways in which these things can transparently do things that, again, humans can do, but not at the speed and not at the scale to actually get a hyper analytical outcome. Whereas because of the power of both the computing, the software, and our capabilities to put the two of them together, we can get so much more out of it than we used to in the past.
Yeah, if you think, I completely agree with you, Greg. If you think about the kind of the big data kind of problems, right? We're talking about speed of the data coming in, the variety of the type of data that's coming in, the breadth of it, the depth of it. Humans just can't process that fast enough, especially if you're trying to make real-time decisions. So, having an AI machine being able to do that would certainly be a benefit.
Well, especially with the distributed nature of data these days, right? Whether it's self-driving cars or thousands of student records and millions of students across the United States of America, right? Or millions of endpoints across a global network of IP backbone, communicating in real time, right? I mean, these are things that humans cannot do in any way, shape, or form. But it's human intelligence that feeds that behavior. I'd love to kind of hear your perspective because you talked about the structured analytical side. But you think about that left brain and right brain approach, right? But are we bringing both elements of that predictive analysis into these technologies, to ultimately implement not just that, hey, what the numbers tell us, but there's that human element of it too, that, that gut check that, oh, I know the numbers are telling me X, but I really believe Y. And is that built into these solutions?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I think there are a couple of things we could talk about there. So one is, this concept of active learning, which is that when the machines are kind of coming up with their own recommendations, they may surface that up when things maybe are a little bit ambiguous and not, the decision isn't clear one way or the other, and bring that up to a human and let the human make the final call as opposed to it making the final call, because maybe the human has a specific type of intuition. So that's certainly kind of one way that you can include some of that kind of human in the loop type of things.
And one last thing that I'll mention is that if you look at brain science, humans have false memories. Even if an accident just happened, there's already their past memories that are impacting how they're remembering what happened. And that's something that with artificial intelligence, being able to report exactly what happened during an accident to law enforcement versus someone trying to incorrectly recall what happened and thinking that they know what happened. But, I think that that's something that we'll see used more often in the future as well.
I would like to add consistency in the kinds of decisions is also as one reason to go after somewhat for an automated support. Also, I'm curious to know what the panel thinks, because we seem to be highlighting a lot of nice things, which is good about technology and AI. I also heard a mention about promotions and jobs and things like that being made by AI. Now, I'm just curious, are we ready as a society to be making these kinds of personal decisions using machines and using AI? or do you see this as mostly a vehicle to help us make decisions, more of decision support as opposed to decision making engine? That's my question. So.
Yeah, I would think it's the latter, Anna. I think you're right. I mean, I think if we were fired or we got a promotion tomorrow, and when they said, "Oh, it was because his algorithm said that was the right thing to do," we'd be kind of scratching our heads. But to your point, I think having something kind of tell you, okay, these are the indicators for why a decision might be made one way or the other. I think that's certainly quite helpful, right? So part of that is interpretability of the machine, being able to understand why the machine is telling you that what it is, and then using that information to kind of formulate your own decision.
Yeah, one thing I would add too, and this kind of can be applied in many different ways. When we think about the data, sometimes the absence of data is the information we're looking for. And collecting all this information to help understand and identify trends, sometimes is then identification of what's not amongst this group. We're always looking what's like the others, and we're going to classify them into different buckets and then look for the anomalous things that are the outliers. But sometimes once we're able to put all this information together, there's information that's not there. And sometimes it's looking for what's not necessarily in front of us that helps us to find the answer of the problem, rather than looking for one specific piece of information.
It'll be interesting to see the machine make the decision and your immediate supervisor make the decision, and then see if the decision actually matches or not. If not, what was the reason that was different? And that's I mean, it's a fascinating in terms of what you asked, in terms of like, is this going to be helpful? Sure, it eliminates bias, but it may also bring to light certain things that we were probably not aware of previously.
Something I was wondering about the other day was, well, after listening to some podcasts and whatnot, what about the two things? Do we have, I understand the need for massive amounts of data in certain things, but other times there's not a lot of data available. And so can we get accurate information from smaller amounts of data? And then with huge amounts of data, I just scratched the surface on the deep learning. What is that? Can you explain what that is? Like, if computing power is going to take it's going to take a critical amount of computing power to generate, to process the data. And so is that an issue? I mean, energy is always a concern of that. How are we kind of working around that? And that's kind of vague, but if somebody, Alan?
Yeah, I guess there's a lot there. So the small data question, this is why it's very important to actually have people who know what they're doing when they're using these tools. One thing, I mean, that I've observed since I've started in this field, especially machine learning, the tools got easier and easier and easier to use until pretty much anybody can use them with a little bit of Python knowledge. And by use, I mean misuse just as easily as use, and believe in believe predictions that they probably shouldn't. And so you have to be very aware. That's why having a good background in statistics especially is very important. If you have small data, well, there's only, and you train a model that has 1 billion parameters, you should not put a lot of stock in the predictions. And so, for example, in agriculture, we often have a small amount of data. So we work with grape data collected about cold hardiness during the winter. You got 30 years of data. Well, that's really not a lot of data. It's hundreds or maybe thousands of data points compared to millions or billions, which are used deep learning models. And so we adjust how we train models. And you have to have a good way of validating those models. So that's really the key thing. Having people apply these models that know what they're doing and know how to validate the models as well as they can, especially for higher stake applications that you're going to put your trust in. The large data situations, I mean, there is a lot made of, you know, Google trained this model and it required so much energy. To some degree, yeah, that's true. But we also have to remember that sometime what's going to likely happen is once these models are trained, they're just going to be used over and over and over. You're not going to have to retrain it every time. That's where a lot of the energy is used. There is a lot of work going on trying to have energy efficient computing and energy efficient AI algorithms. Sometimes you can make models smaller. So that's always going to be an issue, but it's an issue with all computing, really. I don't see it as particularly you know, something that calls out AI in particular. So maybe somebody else has other thoughts.
No, but Alan, to your point, the ease of access, and not to say that it's just Microsoft and Amazon and Google and other cloud providers that have built these platforms and extended these capabilities, but you know, the barrier to entry to implement some of these solutions is much lower than it ever has been before. Right, as you said, you kind of all you need is, you know, a little bit of programmatic knowledge, a credit card, a cloud provider, and all of a sudden you're analyzing the world's problems. Now, what are the problems you're trying to solve and analyze, and what are the implementation that is to be determined? But in the past, it used to be you had to build significant infrastructure, right? You had to make significant capital investment. You had significant knowledge in how to get to the point where you can even implement said technologies. Whereas now within, you know, I hate to say it's 15, 20 minutes of YouTube, but, you know, we're all a few clicks away from being able to start to harvest our own information and then apply it in any way we want.
Okay, I think we're gonna circle back to open Q&A in about 40 minutes, give or take. But we've got a series of panel questions for you that we're going to transition into. Thank you for. I know that's always tough, right? You're kind of almost not improvising, but kind of working on the fly there. So I did see, Rachel, I think you answered a question I was super excited about on there, so I might make you answer it live at the end, just about the future of the classroom. Just as an educator, that's exciting to me. So yeah, let's kick back into our panel questions for the second half here. We've got about another 35 to 40 minutes to play around in there. Doug, are you cool if I start us off on that? He's real obstinate, you can tell. So let's start off with like students looking to get into the AI industry. What's the best place to go? We talked a little bit about like skills and passions that might be interesting, but building on that question, what's the best place to get started? Like internships, certificates, trainings, and then maybe some of those absolute basics. So where should people start? And Sai, are you okay if we start with you, considering you're at the college?
Sure. And yeah, I mean, I would like to say come to Wenatchee Valley College, but you know, that's surely one way, one place to start. Like the fellow panelists mentioned earlier, you need to have a good domain knowledge. So I think it's important to build those fundamentals and you know, gaining those skills become very, very important before you think about a career. You know, building those math skills, statistics, even some kind of a programming knowledge. All those things become very important, and then of course you apply all of them in the AI field. So I think there should be a lot of emphasis on developing those fundamental skills before you go full-fledged into AI.
So I would say maybe in addition to getting some domain exposure, I think wherever you could get your hands dirty, really experiential learning, I think will go a long way at an early stage, so that you will have a reference as you learn more. Oh, okay, I did this project back when I was a ninth grader or a 10th grader. I built something, And you would always have that reference, and you slowly build up that knowledge. And I think that comes only with a project with an implementation component to it. And implementation also forces one to view a system at an end-to-end basis, right? It's very important to actually look at things on under the hood, what's going to happen, even if you don't have a handle on, if you're not really implementing the code that is actually implementing the algorithms and so on. You need to at least understand what's going on, so you'll know what to expect, and you will be able to reason and interpret those results out of it, right? And so that these things take a little bit of time. I would say, pick a project with a mentor, hopefully a couple of mentors, peer mentoring goes a long way too. Pick students who are ahead of you slightly, right? I mean, a grade higher or something, that way you can actually get your hands dirty on working on a particular project, learn and kind of synthesize that information once the project is implemented, what really went through, what worked, what did not, and so on.
I think maybe, Anand, I think what I'm taking away from what you said is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm kind of thinking about this idea of building a portfolio of your work, right? So as you're building, as you're working on different problems and trying out different methods or different algorithms, you come up with different solutions, and now you have something that you can show to someone and be able to explain, this is why I approached it a certain way, and these are the results I got. So maybe that's something that can be useful for people starting out. And then, I personally didn't start out as a data scientist. So one thing for me that was pretty helpful was I did a boot camp, and that's a 1 or 2 week kind of thing, depends. But in a pretty short amount of time, you're able to get a good amount of knowledge and a good amount of practice. Like, so if you do one that's hands-on, that kind of forces you to get onto the keyboard and start writing Python, R, or whatever, to build models, and you can start to get an understanding that way. So I just offer that up as another perspective of how to jumpstart the learning process.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Doug.
No, I was going to move on, but you got something, go ahead.
Well, it was just going to be more from kind of that career path. And I heard you talk about building that, that Rolodex, that repository, right? That repertoire of information, right? At the end of the day, we're all building our brands within our organizations, both internally and externally. But, to a lot of people, they talk about education is really about being continuous learners, right? And we're all going to come in on the ground floor, not to say everyone's starting on the help desk as an example, although many of us, I think, cut their teeth in the front line helping people with their frontline problems, where I think you may actually learn the most in how to deal with people as opposed to how to deal with computers. Computers are very easy to deal with. They're pretty predictive in their analysis, but people a little bit more erratic and emotional in their decision making. But it's up to each one of us to constantly be lifelong learners. And, the technologies that we're talking about are just, a subset of the things that, we're all going to continue to focus on in the next 10, 20, 30 years. And if you think about how do you put yourself on that pathway to prosperity where you want your career to be, right? There's many things you're going to do along the way, both in the short, medium, and long term to help get you there.
All right. Next question. Are there any gender or cultural barriers within AI? And do those align with any other statistics that we see in technology, just in general? So any thoughts on that? And you could even go into, we've been talking careers and whatnot. You could even add it into that. So anything as far as equities, things like that you can think of? Alan?
Barriers, yeah, I'm not sure exactly what a barrier would be. I mean, I think CS and even STEM in general has there's a lot more males. That sort of, and every organization that I know has been trying to change that and improve the ratio. For forever, with different levels of success depending on the organization. So I wouldn't say it's a lot different than that. I would say that I do think that areas like AI could be they may be more compelling to more people, in the sense that there is this AI plus X type of superpower that you gain. And so whatever X is, I think what you're going to see is that people can very quickly, they'll see that adding AI to that, or at the very least computation to that, is going to be highly beneficial. And so the hope is that that will help some. So, if there are more ways to get into the AI area, then hopefully that will just diversify the group of people that will be attracted to it.
And picking up on what you said previously, Alan, I liked how you talked about getting the biology degree, then you get the AI. And so becoming an expert in a topic, I suppose there's that part. So there's that part, and then you add the AI, or there's then the part of all I want to do is computer science and AI. I guess, is that kind of the two ways you go about it?
Yeah, there's probably more ways, but I would say that yeah, you might be primarily interested in biology, and you very quickly see that to be the best biologist, to be effective, you're going to have to learn computation at the very least. And then you're probably also going to see that data analysis, and you might call it AI, is going to also be important. And you'll take those alongside your biology classes, perhaps. You might minor in CS but I think computational thinking and computation is just going to become more and more of a core educational component as we move ahead. It probably should already be more core than it is. And then, yeah, there are people like me who are just happy to, play with computers and AI for AI's sake, because they watched Star Trek and thought it was cool.
Star Trek is cool. And I should say, one more thing, perhaps AI plus X, or AI as it is, has an attractive attribute to it when it comes to promoting, like engaging with a much broader, diverse as workforce, would be that, I think there's a bit more societal value, right, that one can clearly show that, because AI has impacted already every aspect of our life, right? We just have to be able to see it. And also that societal value in some cases can be really, can help differentiate some gender equity. For example, and I sometimes see, many schools have civil and environmental engineering in one school, even at WSC we do. It so happens that civil engineering is mostly males, while environmental engineering gets a lot more women, right? And so it's true, wherever there is a bit more societal value, I think there is a bit more diversity in this group. I'm just using that as an example, and I feel that can be used to our advantage, to the STEM and computing CS programs in general, not just AI. As a way to pitch AI and look at use cases. I think we, as an educating institution, we have to figure out what would be the right kind of projects to introduce at the 100 level and 200 level to embrace that diversity, right? And I think the technology is there, the principles would still be the same, just that the flavor of the projects would be different, right? As opposed to everything being game development. And so I think that we can do much better than we are doing now, but I think there's certainly a potential to draw a lot more diverse learners into this area, and eventually them choosing the career pathways in AI.
Some of you have touched on this a little bit, but Alan, if you don't mind, I think I'd like to start with you, because you mentioned a little bit how you got into the field. I think there can be some potentially misconceptions or not whole understandings of AI from the outside. What are some things that you wish the general public understood about the AI field?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, because I sometimes don't even like to use, Anath knows this, I don't like to use the term AI or artificial intelligence because it's so loaded. People start thinking about machines having feelings and being conscious, and then you get people like this Google engineer. I don't know why he's called an engineer, who, who gets famous for a little while because he, spins a story about Google's AI being conscious, and people somehow give that credibility. So I really think, that people need to view AI as, it's just, these are just computer programs that uh, they're just computer programs right now. They don't have feelings. They're not even close to having anything like feelings. They don't have their own desires. People, any goals that they try to achieve are programmed in, or given to them somehow by a human. And there's nothing. You should just view them as programs. And I prefer to view AI as sort of a field like electrical engineering, right? It's it's a field that has a historical name that may not be as descriptive as we like, but it's a field where you're developing algorithms that requires something that feels like intelligence. And the funny thing is that as time goes on, what we consider to be intelligent now will just seem like nothing in the future, and you won't call it AI anymore. That's one of the things that is commonly said about AI. Once you solve it, it's no longer AI. A calculator would have felt like AI, 50, probably 100 years ago. So that's what I just want the general public to realize. It's not magic. A lot of startups have started and failed because they pretend AI is magic. Jerry's probably seen a lot of this, and so you have to come at it with realism. Know that these are algorithms; they work for a reason, and yeah, there's no magic. So that's what I want people to know.
Jerry, you're muted.
Darn, I failed that test twice now in the last 10 minutes. Thank you for that. Just to add on to what Alan said, there are different types of AI, and at least in the AI that we're working with mostly, we call that artificial narrow AI, meaning the job of the machine is something very specific, like what we were talking about, which customer is going to churn, or how much credit should we offer somebody, or should we accept, what's the customer lifetime value of this person. It's extremely specific in terms of what it does. And we contrast that with something called artificial general intelligence, which is more of this idea of a machine kind of thinking, I guess, behaving as a human would. So I think we're quite far away from that. I mean, I know people are working on it, but we're still quite far away from it. And the vast majority of the applications today are kind of in that, artificial narrow intelligence. I think somebody also kind of in the chat raised the question about, the threat of AI taking over human jobs. And honestly, this is, in my opinion, it's no different than any other type of automation, if you will, right? And historically, when we've gone through the Industrial Revolution as an example, and we've added machinery to factories or whatever, then yes, it's kind of taken away certain roles from certain types of jobs, but that usually has opened up opportunities to do other things, i.e. more things that are more creative. And so I think that trend is same with AI. It's going to automate a couple of things, and maybe it'll require fewer people to do those things. But the idea would be, and I'm going to reference Alan's Star Trek thing, because I'm also a Trekkie, Alan, by the way, that allows people to, do work that, or to do things, follow their passions, if you will, that are not related to kind of the mundane type of things. So now we can be taking these moonshot type of opportunities, or these moonshot type of projects that we want to accomplish that requires far more creativity than this artificial narrow intelligence. At least that's my opinion. Be interested in what other people have to say too.
I completely agree with that. So it's too compelling to put out stories about AI's taking over the world or taking all of our jobs, and I think that's just a lot of it's clickbait. In my opinion, I think, like you were saying, every technological revolution, there's going to be a transition period, and our human creativity, the way we can't imagine what's going to be on the other side, but there's always something on the other side. And I think we should just go with statistics and say, okay, there's going to be something on the other side this time, just like all the other times. And some people will try to put out arguments that this is different, but I've never bought those arguments. That's a debate that can be had, and maybe it's true, but I'm going to go with the statistics.
Well, in regards to the technology innovation, right, these have enabled additive capabilities within our companies, within society, within our lives, as an example. And we may automate certain tasks that are mundane and highly repetitive, maybe done more accurately via machines than we can ever potentially do. But at the same token, especially as it relates to education, right? And my wife's a teacher. She's a first grade teacher. She actually recently got her master's in the last few years. It's been in the classroom the last few years. I think the job of educators as part of critical infrastructure has been more apparent than ever. And though maybe there's been some more online teaching as opposed to always in-person teaching as an example, and clearly education has gone through a major transformation in the last couple of years, but the need for that human element, both from an empathy, from an enablement, from an inspiration. I heard coaching and mentoring talked about earlier on, right? And the one thing that I'll encourage all of us is that, so much of what we learn is from who we work with, regardless of the field that we're working in, right? And the opportunity to learn something is not just from online, is not just from YouTube, is not just from a book or the next fancy fad, right? But from the people around us, right? And to be more open to engaging with those individuals, right? And realizing that everyone has something to teach us and learn along the way. And these are always going to be things that are additive capabilities. So whether we're teaching in the classroom or selling security solutions or analyzing big data, right? These things are going to change our lives for the benefit, right? And help maybe eliminate some of the things that are not always necessarily required of our time and tasks.
I should probably also add that I think AI, and not specifically technology, but AI more so, I think has, in some sense, given us more flexibility on where we work from and how you, like in the location of your career, right? I mean, I think it's rural communities, more specifically, I think stand more to gain than to lose, because there's going to be more technology-driven jobs, hopefully, coming into rural communities with more incorporation of technology. And also it gives you flexibility of being at different places and still be able to perform your jobs and fulfill your responsibilities at different locations, right? I mean, you can be in Seattle perhaps and be able to operate some farming infrastructure in Central Washington, or you can settle down in the Central Washington area and still be able to work for a tech firm in Seattle, right? I mean, I think those are all plus points. I think we should leave the mundane / well-defined problems where there's a very clear set of simple rules that a machine can do, to let the machines do it, and we focus on somewhat more complex problems and where human intelligence is really necessary. And we can't solely depend on machines. And I think AI has kind of showed us the way there to a good extent.
All right. If there was something that was kind of a big jump in AI, what do you think it would be, and how would it kind of affect you and what you're doing? And I don't know what the big jump is, but if there was something that's I mean, some of you are trying to figure that out, what the big jump is. But it's like, man, if we had just this one more thing that could happen, what would it do to our jobs?
So if you're thinking about jobs in particular, I think, you know, a big jump that would affect a lot of things is getting and this is not the sort of thing that you think of as super intelligent, but basic sensory motor control of robots. Like robots are not very good at just picking things up like an arbitrary object. And once we can master perception better than we do now and master sensory motor control, then you can start having a robot you know, clean off your table and put all the dishes away, right? Imagine how nice that would be, right? Guilt-free, just tasking of housework, right? You don't have to have kids do it. You don't have to hire a maid. It's just that would be a big deal. So that's one of the things that I think about a lot. One of the other things that I'll mention is for safety critical applications, like self-driving cars and other things of that nature. AIs are still not very good at knowing the limits of their knowledge, so that they don't know what they don't know. So if it's trained to recognize cats and dogs and you show it a cow, it will probably call it a cat or a dog with high confidence. It doesn't know that it's looking at something that it's never seen before. And so that's one of the problems that we really have to crack to really reliably get some of these safety critical applications going.
One thing that's kind of crossed my mind is this concept of digital twins. And, you know, maybe a lot of us are familiar with that from when we think about the metaverse and kind of this virtual world. But it's that same idea of being able to create a logical or meta version of what happens in the real world. And if we were able to create digital twins really easily for everything that we did, any little business process that we did, or every interaction that we have kind of in the real world, then I think that would be a huge jump in terms of being able to optimize kind of those things. So the idea then we would be able to create that digital world or digital twin, put through a whole bunch of simulations on it and see kind of what is the outcomes that would, you know, that we would like to have. And then we can go ahead and execute that in real life. Digital twins are very common now in like kind of factory kind of environments, but maybe not so in other things. So if the barrier to entry to create digital twins eventually comes down, then I could see a lot of changes in terms of how we would behave in the real world.
How close do you think that reality is? Because you said it's semi-common in like factory settings, but that idea of digital twins, I mean, I'm assuming if you're talking about people who are working on it, like how far on the horizon is that?
Yeah, I think to create digital twins right now takes a fair amount of effort. Right. So if you want to do a factory, then I'm pretty sure it's taking quite a bit of compute power and understanding physically what's happening in that environment before you can translate it to the virtual world. So in order for something like that to be common across, you know, our normal everyday world where we're not working in a factory, but we're just doing common things, or we're in our business and we have like a process that we're trying to execute and try to create a digital twin just like that, I think we're a ways away from that. But I wonder if other panelists are maybe more closer to that and see that as being something on a much closer horizon.
I'm not sure the metaverse is my realm of specialty, but I want to come back to something that we were talking about earlier on about these transformational changes that are really impacting the way in which we go about, our lives. And it's really about that distributed nature of these IoT devices that feed a lot of the technologies that are AI and ML based, right? And whether we're talking about sensors that are running in the field from an agriculture perspective, whether we're talking about these digital sensors that run in the network, or they talk about things that are running inside our teaching and learning environments out there. But we've got more availability to interconnect a variety of new devices than ever before, right? And the power and the connectivity of both edge computing, right? And whether edge computing is my iPhone or edge computing is some Raspberry Pi device living in the wine field, as an example, right? There's so many new types of things that are connecting to these systems that in the past never were able to, right? Especially at that last mile rural agriculture, the connectivity has been so sparse, whereas now with 5G, LTE, and other things that we can do wirelessly now, the ability to provide access is greater than ever, right? The barriers to entry are coming down. I'm not saying that they don't still exist out there, but now our ability to incorporate whole new types of information gatherers to feed these artificial intelligence and feed the machine learning. And Alan, I can only imagine the types of devices that you and your team are thinking about for years to come. If you're looking for people to test those dishwashing robots, come to the Pepper household. But, there's much bigger problems beyond just the mess that I created in the kitchen that hopefully we're all going to solve here today.
So perhaps one more big jump in AI probably could help in many ways is the science of interpretation and interpretability in general, on how much of black boxes can we get rid of or at least be able to explain. And I think that will really go a long way in really how these tools are used, right? And how they are, if there's a forecasting or some decision being made, what do we know about these decisions, on what basis these decisions have been made? And that would really mean, okay, how much of those decisions, recommendations given by the tool are really implemented in practice? So, I mean, that would be one big jump, right? And then, of course, there has to be a strong theoretical foundational work in some sense that needs to be done, but also a good amount of domain knowledge is needed, because interpretation obviously is very much tied to the domain. And I believe that there was mention about digital twin and so on, but I think at least to the best extent, our ability to use already acquired knowledge by the humans in terms of the models that we have, at least from the scientific side of things, how things work, and be able to look for where data can fill the holes or gaps in our understanding, and be able to improve them as a two-way between data and modeling. I think it would be a good way to essentially progress as a field. It's already happening, under so many umbrella terms like science-guided machine learning and things like that. But I think it would really help us ground our data and inferences on the models and based on our understanding that we have so far, and be able to also improve our understanding in the process.
Yeah, no, that is actually in some industries like financial services or healthcare, that's really critical, right? And there are regulatory requirements around that. So if we have a really good model, but we're not able to interpret it or explain it particularly well, then probably won't get passed by the regulators. And it's a shame, right? Because then we can't use it in the real world.
I will add to that, though, that there's a real danger. So I worked on a DARPA project, a 4-year project on explainable AI. And what you realize is the explanations are very, very complicated. This is the theoretical basis that Anath was saying. And it's like humans, when we try to explain our decisions, sometimes we're just making things up. Like a lot of our decision making, we don't even realize why we're making the decisions. And we make things up. And so can somebody who's developing an explainable AI component. And so we have to be very careful as well about what types of explanations, actually understanding what is that an explanation of. And yeah, I personally feel like we're going to get to a point where we you know, the most complex models we just won't be able to explain, and we just have to rely on testing and validation, just like we do for our current complex software systems. But for some models, you know, linear models, which you probably work a lot with, yeah, there is some hope for reasonable explanations.
This might be someone who's outside the industry, like buying into fear mongering, but you mentioned getting to models so complex that we don't understand how they're working or can't explain them. As professionals in the field, is that cause for concern, or like is that like human ego kind of coming into play, where like potentially we're basing our decisions off of something that we can't really fully understand or explain?
I don't see it as a cause for concern. I mean, it's concern if you're not careful, right? So I mean, we don't understand how we're working, how all of us humans are working. I mean, I sit in traffic and I'm like, why am I trusting all these brains behind the wheels? Like somehow not one of them is like gonna go crazy, and you know, and every now and then one of them does. But it's rare. It's amazingly rare. So I think, you know, there's really two choices in my mind. Either you say we're simply not going to try to address some certain problems as well as we might with computation, because we can't understand the details of the decisions, or we say, okay, yeah, there's going to be a lot of benefits. Yeah, we don't fully understand the blind spots, but we've tested it really well, and it's you know, the cost benefit ratio works out. I think that's sort of where we'll end up, and it will feel kind of natural. Like you'll see robots walking around doing things, and you won't understand why it's doing it, but a robot has never freaked out and done something bad to you in all your encounters, and you just learn to trust it, just like a human. So.
I totally agree, Alan. I also think we have to be prepared to deal with complexity, right? High complexity, I think, will become part. In fact, there's a bit more fundamental reason why we should be prepared for complexity, and I sometimes talk about this in the class, where, you know, it's, I think, one of the things that differentiates computer science to other basic sciences like physics and chemistry and so on. Initially in physics and chemistry, we start with really a black box, and as we try to understand the laws of nature and we do more experiments, we get more and more cues, and we slowly start understanding the things. I think in the software world, it's exactly the opposite. We start with a hello world program and slowly add functions and complex routines to it, and at the end, no one knows what's going on, right? It's a typical problem that all software industry people will know. So I think what I'm saying is we are looking at more and more complex systems, especially in the automated side, and some level of explanation can give us some comfort. How much of it is necessary or essential is going to depend on the type of the way in which the software is being used.
Well, I think we're going to open up here. I'll let Stefan and Doug kind of help us as we transition. This has been such a robust conversation. It's not over. We just want to give an opportunity for those listening in to drop some questions and for our panelists to respond to those. It looks like in the Q&A feature, we've got about 7 questions in there as well as in the chat. So I'll push back to Stefan and Doug to kind of pepper those in. I want to let the audience remind you guys that while we are going to formally wrap here at 3:30 today, our panelists have generously said they'll stay on for another half an hour. So if we don't get to your question here, you really wanted to dive in deeper or maybe a little bit more informal, stay online with us from 3:30 to 4. We'll have some more time together. So back to our moderators.
All right, good. So we've got Lydia's asking, what advice do you have for parents and AI? as a parent of young children who are interested in technology and robotics, how do you support getting kids involved, and also advice on caution, safety aspect of kids in this advanced technology?
Well, yeah, I am a parent, but I'm you really only go through this parent thing once, so I don't know if my advice is worth anything. So one good way to get them involved in AI is through robotics programs. A lot of communities have those. A lot of high schools have robotics teams. I know at least one of my kids learned a lot, learned how to program from scratch, just joining a robotics team. And they really get the sense for, computational thinking, and AI, what's involved. Like, you take in data, you do some processing, and you put an action out. So I think that's a great way, and there's a lot of great programs, a lot of great volunteers doing work there. As far as the advice on caution, I don't know about anything. I mean, I prefer to approach kids with more optimism. I mean, I've seen kids get really depressed about the future, and it kind of makes me really sad. We're not going to, the climate's dying. You become a scientist and save the world. And study AI and solve all the problems. With AI. So I like to be very optimistic with kids. As far as the caution, I think they should realize, if they don't already, that there are AIs that are trying to fight for their attention, and they all know it. Like, if they're on TikTok or whatever, we all know it, and that's going to be the real challenge going forward. One of the major challenges going forward, in my opinion. So anybody who can resist who learns how to resist the temptations that these AIs on social media are giving you, that's a superpower in itself. If you can sit down and focus and resist getting sucked in. So.
No, I like what you said there, and I have two boys myself that are 15 and 11, and earlier on, when they both did some of those programming Lego adventure camp type things and competition type things, and even though it's fairly simplistic, they start to build some of that critical, logical thinking. But to your second point, I think one of the most important thing is teaching our kids to put these devices down and be kids again. And sometimes, it's those social interactions and the ability now to engage with others that are going to be more important to drive their ultimate successful outcome than whether or not the good or the bad or the ugly of these AIs and MLs are determining what their outcomes might be.
I also have a kid. He's 10 years old now, and agree with all of the things that you guys have said in terms of, learning how to program, start getting involved in math, kind of all that stuff. I think one thing I've also realized is I think I've become a better parent, actually, as a result of understanding how machines learn. And that's because I kind of think of the individual kid as this kind of basic algorithm. Yeah, he's got a certain bias one way or another, but he's pretty much, or he or she is pretty much just a clean slate. And then depending on the exposure that you give them to different experiences, then they start to morph into something else. And then their way of making decisions ends up being different as a result. So what I've tried to do with him to keep him more interested is to try to help him understand how he's learning. And the way that he's learning is quite similar, actually, to how a machine learning model would learn. And then the different biases and the different variant, they have this thing called a bias variance trade-off in machine learning, is something that I'm also trying to help him understand as he grows up. So I know it's probably weird to think of my son as a machine and try to help him understand how he learns versus a machine learn, but I found that actually captures his attention a bit.
I'd also like to add mention about basic sensing, or like circuits building. I think even at home, you don't need fancy robots like Arduino sensors. You get kits for like $50-$60 on Amazon, and you basically have the kids play with it, get some hands-on experience. And I think my son, who's 11 years old, he seems to be enjoying it. He's like, he's doing some coding on the side. He's actually building a circuit, see what happens when the bits and the bytes flow through it, and figure out, where the analog to digital conversion happens and things like that, right? So I think it gives a little bit more understanding of what happens under the hood, and then they get creative, right? Can I use it to actually control the light in this room, or can I basically clap my hands and see whether my audio sensor picks up, and if not, what is blocking it, and things like that. So starting to reason things out. I think these are nice toolkits that are really available now, as opposed to maybe even 10 years back, not so much. I think that's a great thing. In terms of caution, I do see, I think there are possible issues where especially kids in middle school and high school, I do see some, possibly when they make these programs, and especially when they are making some emojis or some kind of things, they need to be sensitive to whether it might actually offend certain people or things like that, right? And especially we don't want it to become like some kind of bullying thing, and that's something that we might have to keep a watch on, and at least inform the kids if unintentionally, in most cases, some representation of these things may not necessarily reflect it may possibly offend some people, and we need to make sure that they're aware of it, at least, right, to the extent possible.
Finally, I guess, just to add to, I know already several panelists have talked about this, but one other way it could be getting them hands-on as much as possible. I know some of the ways to do that is like what Anand said, work with these kids, or like Alan mentioned, there are these robotic workshops and things like that you can get your kids involved. Even to the basic thing, like, okay, something breaks in your house, how do you fix it? Why did it break? Developing those critical thinking aspects will also be very helpful. In terms of caution, I'm also a little bit optimistic in terms of, how do we, rather than looking at the negative side, how can we use AI to enhance the HI? Can this help my, I have a kid at home, my daughter of 10, how can I help my daughter learn things much more than she, with all this technology that is lying around, than she would have otherwise. Sometimes I wish I had these options when I was growing up and learning. Similarly, so now that they have all this, in front of them, how can they do much better than in their day-to-day life? So that's what I would do.
I'm assuming they're gonna wrap us up here soon, but I do want to get to Mr. E's question over here, because that was actually one we sort of had prepped for the panel discussion and didn't get to. So he asked that AI requires the collection and storing of huge amounts of data, as we talked about a little bit in the last 2 hours or so. He says, should we be concerned about all the data being collected about our personal lives?
So let me take the first stab at it. I do understand that I think there are very legitimate privacy concerns here, whether we like it or not. In some sense, data is being collected about whatever we do online. The moment you log into a computer, most of the data is being collected, right, statistics wise. And but also, I think there is value in some of the data being shared, and I don't want to just talk of the negative things. And privacy concerns are, sometimes I think overblown in some areas. So, for example, like health, especially, if I think if every patient were to share without the identity information or whatever, look at the attributes and like the health outcomes on, because every patient is different, like whether the treatments worked or not, I think there's value in sharing some of the data in a voluntary way. Right? Of course, it can't be forced, but certainly it has to be voluntary. But I think there's definitely value in sharing data, because it just makes our ability to act on it and use that, derive knowledge from that raw data much more precise and accurate and dependable. So I just wanted to bring that up, saying, it's not just about like collecting data from a privacy standpoint being bad, but also there is some good element. And so how do we make sure we get the best out of it without really having any privacy implications? And so that's a big question.
Yeah, I'll just jump in quickly. So I mean, the data is going to be shared, and I don't know how. I'm a little skeptical about legislating this. These are really hard things to legislate correctly because it's so new. My biggest concern, this might go back to the kids issue, is that nowadays you see people getting fired or whatever for whatever is discovered about their past history sometimes. And kids don't make the best decisions, and so any data being collected on them, I mean, they just have to be aware somehow early on that everything's going to be collected and it's never going away. And that's really what I worry about. I really hope that society will actually realize that people do change as they age, and but I think kids especially need to be aware of this because they're probably the least concerned. Like they just want to get the next TikTok video or whatever and sign their life away. I think the days of thinking that our data is private are long past. There's too much money to be made.
Yeah, and the data about us is not new. I mean, everyone thinks, it wasn't until Facebook and Google that my private information was being analyzed and collected, but Visa and MasterCard and everyone else in the marketing world have been doing this for generations. That being the case, there is some element of anonymization of data. And I think especially as the data is shared, sometimes it's not necessarily that they want the information about, Greg Pepper per se, but they want the information of a middle-aged, male who's 40-something years old as an example, and is that macro data. And I'm not saying that, that's a better type of information to be sharing when it's anonymized as an example, but there's often situations where, yes, the data is helpful to share, and, I've talked about healthcare information and other research as an example. But this is where we have to be able to understand, are they just after the metadata, the information that my information creates, or the information to be able to target and harvest specifically me? When we think about threat actors in particular, right, and the ability to easily now target campaigns towards individuals, whether they're spear phishing or other ways in which targeted links and emails and other malicious content get sent to individuals out there. But these are some of the things that I think represent both opportunities, and clearly, we should be concerned. But I think also, as we've seen in the last few years, which has been, a tailwind in our feathers as an example, is that security is top of mind for everybody these days. I think earlier on, it was kind of an afterthought. I was like, oh, we'll get back to security when we're done with that. But security is paramount to every function that we do these days, and whether there's security in our schools, security in our digital lives, and back to that pillars of education, teaching our kids about the fundamentals of their own digital decision making, right? And as Alan said, right, the information, it's going to live forever, right? And everything's going to be collected. And those are the immutable truths that we have to deal with today.
Greg, that was the perfect segue as far as security goes, because we are wrapping up, but we have an event next week on cybersecurity. So very relevant to the work that we do here at NCW Tech Alliance, the NCSD. Again, we're going to have another 30 minutes of the panelists. There's a few more Q&A in there. So for those of you who are just loving this rich conversation as I am, please stay on board. But we want to formally thank our panelists. So give them some love in the chat. They've done an outstanding job. Our panelists and our speakers and our moderators, thank you so much for being a part of today and a part of the second annual AI Expo. I'm going to let Tammy give you some wrap up as far as the STEM Summit attendees. And then again, we're going to do some more Q&A. It's going to still show this as recording, but we're actually going to end it as far as what we post online on YouTube later on. This full session will go on YouTube at the conclusion of Tammy's slides here. So Tammy, over to you.
All right. Yeah, I think that this pretty much wraps up everything. I just want to say a huge shout out to our team that put this on, all of the panelists for being here today, our moderators. Thank you so much. This was very valuable information. I definitely learned a lot today. I don't know if anybody else has, but this was great discussion. Thank you so much. I'm going to pop back here, but thank you. And just want to send one more shout out to our sponsors for the STEM Summit. And you can see all of them there on the slide here. Don't forget to take the 2022 STEM Summit survey to provide us with feedback with the entire event. We use this information for planning the next year's STEM Summit. So if you are listening in today and are part of the STEM Summit, please get on there, give us your feedback. We love to hear it. And if you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to our team. Obviously at the Tech Alliance, and then also the Apple STEM Network, or at the NCESD with Barb, and her contact information is there. But thank you so much. I'm going to pop it back to the Q&A slide, and thank you guys so much.